What's going on, Latin Wealth family? Welcome to another episode to the Latin Wealth podcast. And today I'm extremely excited about this episode because not only do we have a new guest on the podcast today, we have a guest that's talking about something that we have not spoken about on the podcast before. And honestly, it's not spoken about very often at all, to be honest. So we're going to get into that. It's going to be a fruitful conversation. I'm excited for this conversation. But a little bit about my guest. He is the host of the Quien Tú Eres podcast. He's the founder and owner of Pluar. He is a former tech executive. All right. So welcome to the Latin Wealth podcast, Pabel Martinez. How you doing, bro? How's your day going?
Hey, what's up? I'm happy to be here and excited to chop it up with
Yeah.
you, man.
For sure, for sure. Thank you. We appreciate you hopping on and giving us a piece of your time. So, yeah, we want to just jump right into it. The reason why I wanted to have you on the Latin Wealth podcast is because we really wanted to highlight your work and the community that you're creating, right? One of your guys' mission, well, really your guys' mission is redefining professionalism by empowering authenticity within the Latino community, which is that's a heavy statement right there, right? I know a lot of people can relate to that, so we're gonna break it down. But I want to know, where did this mission come from? Where did it birth from? Take me back to even when you were young, when your first experiences, man. Walk us through how you got to this place now.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people often ask me is like, why did you even use the word professionalism? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think it really stems from whenever I got into corporate, I felt like I heard so many words, like generic ass words of like professionalism and things like executive presence to hide people's bias, their racism, their sexism, their ageism, all of those kind of things. But then I looked up the word and I was like, oh shit, like people are using these words without even looking into what they mean. And when I
Mm-hmm.
broke it down, it was fascinating, right? Like even looking at the word professionalism is defined as a skill or competence expected of a professional, right? But we've
Mm-hmm.
been trained to believe that it has a certain look to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that training for me didn't even start when I got into corporate. For me, to your point, it started back when I was a kid. Like my grandfather growing up, he was very conscious of his appearance. He would often tell me, do you see presidents and CEOs with do-rags and beards and tattoos and earrings? You know what I mean? And I'd be like, oh shit, nah. Right. So he would tell me to act and dress accordingly. Even when I got a little bit older and I went to high school, they had a similar idea. Like there were rules around like, because I went to all boys Catholic high school, and there were rules around like even the type of hairstyles you can have. Like they banned certain traditional quote unquote black hairstyles. You couldn't have an afro, couldn't have braids, dreads, any of that thing. It couldn't be past a certain length, and you couldn't have facial hair below your earlobe, right? So even
Mm-hmm.
then, it was this like training trying to drill into me around like what a quote unquote professional is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm. So around these times, were you aware of this word professionalism? Were you aware of what's going on around you, or were you just like kind of just going with the flow, like this is normal, this is common, I'm supposed to do this? What was your thought process at that age?
Yeah, I mean, the whole time I thought that whether it's high school or whether it's my grandfather or family, what they were trying to do was really protect me from people's negative perceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I grew up in public housing in low income area, and like what my grandfather was describing, right? When he says do rags, tattoos, dudes with earrings, he was describing essentially like what he was seeing around him, and the
Mm-hmm.
people associated to that weren't CEOs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the high school, right? Like their association and like the dreads and the braids, like they associated those that representation with something not good, right? So they were
Mm-hmm.
trying to hide me from that, and they wanted to essentially give me the best chances to succeed, right? But when I got older, I realized like, but why are we not, instead of like having us change, people of color,
Mm-hmm.
why aren't we educating the people that are giving this negative feedback to us? Why can't
Mm-hmm.
we educate them on their bias versus having the onus always be on the individual to change?
Absolutely. I love that. And it's crazy because the reason why I asked that question is, you know, as people of color and Latinos, we go through things in our life that we just think it's common. We think it's normal, but really they're traumas, right? There's traumas that
Mm,
we need to address. There are things that are going on that are
yeah.
not okay. And I love the fact that you said, why do we need to change? Why can't you change the way you think and your perception about us?
Exactly. And I figured, we could do both of it, right? But
For sure.
I think we can start changing people's perceptions the more that we are ourselves, right? So I think
Mm,
even my grandfather, right, thinking back at it, maybe he's never seen a CEO that looks like me
yeah.
going into a press conference with big ass diamond earrings, a beard, and a do-rag. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but you see enough CEOs that look like that, and it'll change his perception. It'll change everyone's perception, right? Similar with women, right? Like natural hair is something that comes up often, right? Like
Mm-mm.
I don't think women will be told to straighten their hair as often if we had enough representation of women
Facts.
not doing it and being successful. So
Facts.
it's really important to create that representation, and that's what I'm trying to do.
For sure. And that's one of the reasons why we started the Latin Wealth podcast, because
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure when you think of Latin wealth, you think of a successful Latino, probably does not look like me, right? And I'm not saying that I'm
Yeah,
super successful and whatnot, but he probably does not talk like me, probably doesn't look like me, and probably hasn't came from where I came from, right? And
mhm.
so we want to create that representation on this podcast to show people like, yo, he's made it. He's came from where I came from. He looks how I look, and he's successful. Why not me?
Yeah,
Why can't I do it, right? And so that's obviously the thing that your grandfather was missing. Even some people in my family were missing as well. Like there's a certain perception of what success looks like to them. So yeah, I love that. But walk me through it, man. You're out of high school. Did you go to college? How talk to me about your career path and whatnot.
yeah. I mean, I was really fortunate that I didn't have a lot of pressure necessarily growing up
Gotcha.
from my family, and that's like a rare situation because I feel like
For
most
sure.
families, they try to push their children to go into certain career fields where
Mhm.
it comes to like, lawyer, doctor, those traditional things. But it's interesting, like I didn't need any of that pressure because I already put that pressure on myself.
Mm,
So like I had the pressure there, but it was all me telling myself that I had to make a certain amount of money. No one told me like you better study this or you better do that. I just saw my environment growing up.
mm,
So for perspective, I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And
mhm,
for those people that don't know, the Upper West Side is one of the wealthiest zip codes in the US.
mm,
But I grew up in the projects.
mm.
So imagine growing up in like a building, 18-story building, and every single floor, like people that look like you in poverty, struggling, you know what I mean? And then you go outside though, and no lie, down the street from me, Macaulay Culkin lived, the dude from Home Alone.
Mm.
So I literally walk outside my door and I'm just like, oh shit, like it's just my building. Everyone around me got money. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like for me, that put the pressure on me on my side to be like, yo, I gotta make money so I can get out of here and still live in the Upper West Side, just not in this fucking building.
Real quick, I love that. Not to cut you off, I want to interject. I love that perspective because I feel like I grew up the same way. Like we grew up in environments where we see wrong all around us, and it's easy for us to say, okay, this is normal. Once again, this is the right thing for me to do, so I'm going to continue doing what everybody else is doing. But for us to have that discernment to be like, no, this isn't right, this isn't what I want for my future, thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the line, it's a
Yeah.
powerful thing, and it's not something to take lightly, because that shift in your mindset allow yourself to change, hopefully a lot in your family and what to come, like, right, you want to probably take your family out of those projects and whatnot, and you want better for the next generation. So I
Yeah.
love that perspective. That's not something to just tap around, right? Just walk past around. I love that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. But yeah, no, it definitely impacted sort of like every decision I've made up to this point, and kind of still does. But
Yeah.
I went to school for economics, and the idea for me was I didn't know what I wanted to do growing up. I just knew I wanted
Mm,
to make as much money as possible. And the original idea for me was like, I'm going to go into business. I didn't know what business meant. For me, I was like, oh, I'm going to go into investment banking. I'm going to go into finance. And that's what I tried to start to do. And economics was a way to get me into that. But I eventually ended up in tech, luckily. And sort of that's where my career continued, thanks to just like internships when I was in college.
Absolutely. And you've had roles at some pretty significant companies like Facebook, TikTok recently. And if you don't mind me sharing, I know you've been outwardly spoken about it, about how much your salary was and whatnot. Talk to me why you transitioned out of the corporate world. What were some of the decisions that went into that? And I mean, a lot of people looking at maybe your situation, they're like, yo, what are you doing? Like, you're making all this money, you have it good. Why would you want to leave? Like, why would you want to transition out of there? A lot of people would dream to make what you're making. Let us know, what that thought process was.
Bro, so such a great question. And to provide perspective from people, I think it's important to like highlight like what life was like. Like I was chilling, bro. Like money was good. Like, and I can get into this later if you want, but I think like total package at TikTok for the first year, I was probably making like 300K with like all in, not even including stock, right? So, thinking about where I grew up, I finally got to the point, even before TikTok, even when I was working at Facebook, like I was paying all of my mom's bills, like rent, car payment, insurance, like you name it, like I was on it, phone bill, everything, right? So it wasn't easy to step away from that, right? To step away from that job security and to step away from that, like I made it feeling not only for me, but for my mom. It was a really difficult decision, but even within the money, I realized like, yo, fulfillment is way deeper than money, man. Like I could make money doing anything. Like I could start OnlyFans and well, maybe you know what I mean?
I mean, hey.
I mean, I don't think my OnlyFans would do that well, but I'm just saying like you can make money doing anything, right?
Anything. Yeah. I heard that.
I realized that like what I was doing on the side as a side project and like a hobby was actually giving me the fulfillment that I needed. Like one example was that when I was at TikTok, I did a post on LinkedIn where I shared my salary transparently, right? And for me, that was one of those moments. That joint went viral in like a week, had like 3 million views. And it wasn't about the number of views, but it was more so about the DMs that I got. And I started realizing like, oh shit, this representation is really important. Like one of the most powerful DMs I got was this Dominican dude, probably like in his early 20s, was like, yo, I didn't know someone that looked like me could make that much money.
There it is.
And I was like, oh shit, I got to keep doing this because this is making more of an impact than me selling some $1 million deal to a company like Samsung. Like Samsung's not going to go out of business. You know what I mean? But my community could continue suffering if it's not for people like me doing this type of work.
Man, I love that. I love that. So walk us through that transition, right? Talk to us about some of the things that were going on at work and talk to us through the things that were like the moments that you're like, yo, this is it. I'm letting go. I'm transitioning out of here.
Yeah. It was a combination of Plural starting to do well and then things at work not going as well. Not necessarily of my performance not going well, but more so I started to get questioned like, why am I doing certain things outside of work? And I felt like people tried to censor me. And I think that example of me sharing my salary transparently was one of those examples, right? If you think about it, I didn't share anything about like any company secrets or about my experience working at TikTok in a negative way. I didn't share any of that, right? What I shared at the time was essentially like my W-2s, right? I just put, this is my base salary, this is my bonus, this is my signing bonus. These are, I didn't even put my stock when I originally made the post, right? But I started getting questions like, why couldn't you handle this internally? Why did you do this? Is it really necessary to do that publicly? and just overall start to question, like, do you like my judgment in making that sort of post, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I tried to explain to executives there was, I did this for Latino Equal Pay Day. I did this to raise awareness that salary
Mm-hmm.
transparency is the reason why we are not getting paid equally. Like, this post, although I work at TikTok, has nothing to do with TikTok.
Right.
It's an issue that is impacting men and women, and however you identify, everywhere, right?
For
But
sure.
I essentially was told, like, don't do that again, and definitely don't talk to press about it. And I was kind of offended. I was taken back. I was like, you can't control my
Mm-hmm.
own social media.
Mm-hmm.
So certain things like that started happening around feeling like people were trying to censor me and the content that I put out there, and minimizing the impact that I was having outside of my day-to-day job.
Mm, I love that. Um, Something that I've heard you talk about a lot, and honestly, I haven't even heard this term before. I brought it up to my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, that's the thing." The term code switching.
Yeah.
Talk to me more about that, man. Your experience with it, because after I dove into it, I'm like, "Damn, like I was one of them people." Like, talk to me about it.
Yeah. Well, if you look at data, which is like fascinating, every time I mention this, is they say 76% of Latinos at work
Mhm.
suppress parts of their identities.
That's a fact.
That's 3 out of every 4 of us,
Yeah,
which
I
is
can see that
crazy. So, like, me, you, your wife, and some other random person, 3 out of 4 of us have done it before.
for sure, for sure.
And when you think about our identity and like what we're suppressing, it could be anything, right? It could be how we speak, could be how we dress, could be, if someone asks us a personal question, we'll come up with a lie. Typically,
Hmm.
code switching is referred to as like, like putting on your quote unquote white voice,
Yeah, yeah. You
instead
acting.
of being like, yo, what's good? People like, hey, top of the morning, sir. How are you? you know, it's it's typically referenced in like a comical way like that, but I think it goes well beyond that.
For
And for
sure.
me, I went to the extent of like dedicating time out of my days during my week to like study
Crazy.
white popular American culture, right? And what
Crazy.
I try to tell people is like, there's nothing wrong with expanding your preferences. For example, like I
For
love
sure.
Seinfeld, I love The Office, right? But that's me testing something, seeing if I like it, and then deciding if I like it or not and continuing, right? But I think we get into the trap of continuing to watch and dedicate time to something that we don't care about just for the purpose of feeling accepted.
Mm,
And that's when we get into trouble. Like, we waste time, valuable time that we could be doing other things, like even our job, but instead we do things to avoid the racism, like microaggression, because we're scared to say things like, oh yeah, I watch Insecure.
mm,
No, I don't watch Riverdale.
mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Wow. Um, I mean, and for me, it's like it's we spend so much time learning about another culture, but we lose track of who we are as people, right? And
Exactly.
for me, I know when I heard that term, I was like, man, it was so draining for me, right? It was something that was draining me, not being myself. Um, Crazy. You said microaggression. What do you mean by that term?
Yeah, that's another word that gets thrown out there a lot. It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like a subtle, I don't know the official definition, but it feels like a subtle, like a jab. Like if racism is like a uppercut or like a right hook that's gonna knock you out,
Mm,
microaggressions is kind of like a jab. It's kind of like a little poke
mm,
around, like, hey, this I'm not fully racist, but what I'm saying is kind of racist. You know what I mean? Like, I'll give you an example.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe I'm giving a presentation and someone comes up to me afterwards and says like, oh my god, like, yo, like you're really well spoken.
Mm,
And it's just
mm.
like,
What's that supposed to mean?
typically you would say like, oh, that's a compliment, wow, thank you, I'm well spoken. But you got to think deeper into like, wait, did you not expect someone that looks like me to be well spoken? Like, why are
Mm-hmm,
you so
mm-hmm.
surprised, bro?
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
or and this is something that's happened to me too, besides being well spoken and hearing that. I gave a rough draft of a presentation to a colleague, and somebody was like, "Oh, that can we fix those slides? Those slides look ghetto."
Mm,
I'm like,
Mm.
out of all words, that's what you decided to use? Because when you use someone else's PowerPoint, you didn't call it ghetto, you called it a rough draft. But for my
Mm.
shit, you call it ghetto. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's certain things that you're like, wait, what do you really mean by that? And it
You
sounds, yeah.
No, not to cut you off. Do you think on their end it's unintentional or is it intentional?
I like to believe that many times it's unintentional.
Mm.
Like even the well-spoken comment, for example, I don't think there's bad intent in that,
Right, right.
but and that's why we need to educate people and have these conversations, right? Like I don't think like many times when people say that to me, even like my manager that told me that at the time, like I don't think she's racist at all, even like
Mm-hmm.
knowing her for mad long, but like that surprise is something that we need to educate people on. You know what I mean?
For
Like,
sure.
why are you so surprised? Right. And I think we need to admit that we're biased. We're
Mm-hmm.
literally all of us are biased, man. Like, and that's a scary thing to admit. But I tell people, like, even I'm biased. Even
True.
me, the dude that's talking about professionalism and redefining it, I'm biased. Like when I go into a cafe, like I typically like my baristas to look homeless.
Yeah, I feel you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
I
if
heard
they
yeah.
don't look homeless, I'm like, damn, is this coffee gonna be good?
This is gonna be good. Yeah.
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 But what I do though, and what many people don't do is that let's assume that barista looks like a Wall Street broker, right? I'm gonna be like, damn, you know what? I fuck it. I'm gonna give this person a chance
Mm-hmm.
to make the coffee. And then I'm gonna taste the coffee, right? And in me tasting the coffee, that's me giving me an opportunity to that barista to change my perception of what a barista is supposed to look
Mm-hmm.
like.
Mm-hmm.
Because originally I'm like, damn, if they don't look homeless, nah, this coffee's not gonna be that good.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Man, that's crazy because it just reminded me of a situation that happened to me at one of my recent roles. It was like the first team meeting that I was there, right? And I felt like they hired me for diversity because I was the only person of color there, right? So we're all on the Zoom call, and they're like, "Okay, we're trying to get to know each other, whatnot. Give us one of your most recent accomplishments and give us one of your most embarrassing moments." So we all say something. There's a lady there. She says her accomplishment, and then she says something like, well, I've had a lot of embarrassing moments. Typically, it's around me saying something racist. Um, I have so many moments. Should I say it? And everybody's like, no, 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 no. You don't need to say it. But it's funny. The reason why I bring that up is because, again, I think unintentionally she just did not know, especially with me being there and me being a new person. It probably it's not accepted, but it was really interesting for me to see that perspective, right? And just hear that from her.
Yeah. I wish you did say it because I kind of want to hear him now.
Man, because she said some other things before, like she made some comments like, "Oh yeah, just Chris, just keep on killing it and just whip it in the back," like.
Oh, that who I've never heard that
I've
before.
never heard of it though. I've never heard of it either, but I have an idea where it came from, and I know you probably
Oh,
shouldn't be saying that.
whip
And
it
I'm
in
just,
the
yeah, yeah, man. It's just like, again, I honestly believe, and it's funny because somebody reached out to me and like privately and on our private messages, they're like, "Hey, I'm sorry that you had experienced that, and go to that. We're gonna talk to so and so about that comment. Make sure it doesn't happen again." I didn't reach out to anybody or say anything. I just like, wow. But someone reached out to me and was like, "Yo, we want to make this right. Make sure it doesn't happen again." And I'm like, wow. I mean, that's crazy, crazy.
See, that's dope though. The fact that
Yeah,
someone even reached out
yeah,
to you,
yeah,
they noticed it as well. Because some people don't even pick up on that stuff. They're like,
for
"Oh,
sure,
that's
for
funny," and
sure,
then they just keep using it. So that sounds like it's a good culture, at least, of people
for
like
sure.
acknowledging it and trying to do something about it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I know something that you mentioned in one of your interviews. You said that there was a point that you would cringe inside at the fact that you couldn't speak your mind on some of the things that were happening around you because you were fearful of losing your opportunity and losing your job. Man, what's give some advice to some people out there that are in that situation that may be feeling like that. And it's, again, it's draining, it's uncomfortable when you're acting and you're not being yourself, and you got the white voice all the time, man, it
Yeah.
affects you, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like that throughout the whole day. You're putting on a mask and it drains you. You got to come home to your family, and you got to, it can affect your whole family, to be honest. I know it has for me as well. So what would be some advice that you would give people out there that are dealing with that?
Yeah. It's yeah. I'm just thinking about it, and the emotion that's coming up is just like sad,
Mm-hmm.
because I used to go through it, and to your point, it's exhausting,
For
right?
sure, for
I
sure. And
mean,
it,
yeah, go
yeah.
for it.
I'm sorry. I just had to say, like, so just to like the last role that I had, man, it was a difficult transition for me because I was going from essentially entrepreneurship to corporate, and I haven't.
Mm.
It was really my first corporate job,
Oh wow.
and the first day on the job, man, like after my shift, I was so drained and exhausted. I was just like, bro, what the heck did I just go through? And it was so bad that my mom called me like a couple hours later. She's like, yo, son, how was your day? How was your first day at work? I was like, I don't want to talk about it.
Mm.
Like the tone that I said it in, the attitude I said it in at the time probably wasn't the best, but that just goes to show you how it can affect people,
Yeah.
right? By you not being yourself, it can affect the people around you.
Hmm.
It could affect my wife. Like now I don't have
Yeah.
energy to hang out with you after. Now I don't have energy to take care of myself. As Latinos, we work so hard to get in these high paying jobs, these high roles, so we can take care of our families. And we get there and we're like, damn, now I gotta act. Now I gotta be somebody else. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I feel you
You do, huh? Yeah, yeah. That's
a
why you created the
thousand,
platform.
a thousand percent, man. Yeah, I mean, it's deep, and it's sad
Mm,
because I'm thinking about even my own experience,
yeah.
and I just know a lot of people resonate with the experience that you're talking about. But the most important thing that I think you mentioned was like, well, one is exhausting, but two, like it's a time commitment that you're
Mm,
wasting in trying to be somebody else, right? When people tell you to be your authentic self, people typically think it means like, oh, throwing on a t-shirt and like throwing in some, you don't have to shave or do your hair. Like, no, it goes so much deeper than that. Like for me, like I would even in my head, I would come up with like a script, kind of like a play.
mm,
I would be like, oh, on Monday, they're gonna ask me how my weekend was. I'm gonna say this and that. They're gonna
mm.
reply, they're gonna ask me what I had for brunch. I'm gonna say that. What if they ask me what shows I'm into? Oh, well, I have to binge watch these
Wow.
shows because if they ask me that, it was like so detailed. Like I was ready for any question in conversation. And it took away from the work that I should have been doing, right? And in every episode that I've done, and I've done like 75 episodes, but by the end of this year, I'll probably get to 100. There's
Mhm,
a common theme, right? Everyone starts faking it at some point, right?
mm,
And eventually they realize it's a waste of time. They realize that their career started taking off when they started being themselves because they have so much more time to dedicate to what they love, right? So
mm,
if you know that eventually you're going to stop, like, why wait? Like,
mhm.
wouldn't you want to start that now?
Yeah.
If you know you're going to stop in your 40s, wouldn't you want to start in your 20s? Like,
Mm,
trust me, your career is going to start taking off. And I've done that. And I know based on research, but on all the conversations that I've had, but I know just based on my own experience. Like, when I
right.
got to Facebook, I almost got fired because I wasn't doing well because I was code
Mm,
switching so much, as I was faking it, I was dedicating time to faking it. When I stopped dedicating time to faking it, and I used that time to actually do my job, I was doing well.
mm. Wow. Wow. And I don't like, I want to say this to the audience. We're not having this conversation because we feel like you should jump ship from your career and your job and just, just go into this world and do whatever you want. I don't know if that's the best move for each or the
Yeah.
best advice for each individual person, but we're having this conversation because we want you to be the best you. We want you to be an authentic you. And we feel like when you're authentic to yourself and who you are, then you can give more to the world. Then you can serve more. Then you could perform better at work. Thus,
Mhm.
you having more opportunities, right, to make more money or whatever your goal is. That's the conversation that we're trying to have here. And I just want to put that out there. I know people, it's big right now. Like job shaming is big. Like, yo, just quit your job, entrepreneurship, jump into entrepreneurship. And I don't necessarily recommend that to everybody because it's scary out there, especially when you don't have a plan. But we want you to be your full authentic self, and we want you to have enough energy to take care of yourself, invest, take care of your family and whatnot. That's what we're hopefully trying to get across as well. But I would love for you to talk about your podcast and your platform, man. Talk about some of the impact that you guys are having out there, and what do you guys focus on?
Yeah, the podcast is going really well, and I think the thing that sets us apart is really the mission around redefining professionalism. For so long, I think a lot of these experiences and stories, they've either gone untold because we're kind of like ashamed to tell people about them. You know what I mean? Like even our families, right? Like we get these cool jobs, and imagine telling your family like, yo, yeah, you know, it's not going well. Like I'm scared to tell them about my weekend. Mom's gonna be like, what the fuck? Do you know what I had to go through when I was young? Like that's the least of your problems. Are you kidding me? Right. Or even things like microaggressions and racism, like we're scared to share those experiences, and those often get told anonymously on places like Glassdoor because we're scared of even calling some of our coworkers out, the retaliation potentially around that, right? So for me, the podcast is one of the first times that I've actually seen, and many people are telling me like, wow, I've never heard some of these stories being spoken about in a public way like that. So because of some of those stories and experiences, like it's been going really well. I mean, you got over like 200 plus 5-star reviews. We're starting to monetize in the form of ads. But and that's a question that I get often is kind of like, how do you monetize your platform?
For sure.
And you'd be surprised that advertising and even like selling merch and all of those things, like I barely make money from that. Like 90% of my revenue is probably going to come from speaking engagements. So because of the nature of some of these conversations, think about like these stories haven't been told before. Companies and the HR teams and managers are like thirsty to learn from us because I have these insights that, again, people haven't necessarily shared. So they want to learn like, well, how can I make people feel more included? How can I create a better work environment? How can I avoid the situations that even you're talking about on like getting to know you call, right? So I've been booked by companies like Salesforce and Google and Univision to like go into their offices virtually or in person and help them make their employees feel more safe being themselves at work.
And how does that make you feel? The fact that, you know, you're getting booked to come out and speak to these people and you're essentially empowering them to be yourself. How does that make you feel?
Bro, it's so empowering, gratifying. And it's honestly, it's not even about the money that's coming in. It's more so about the messages that I get after. Like, yo, even within this company where people are paying you to speak, I don't feel safe being myself. And because of you, I now feel a little bit more safe doing that. And beyond even the individual impact, like people invite their managers and be like, yo, I can't explain what I'm going through, but can you please attend this event? Because I want you to listen to his experience. And leaving that experience, they're like, now my manager gets it. So it is really powerful stuff. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. But overall, I'm also just like excited for what's to come.
Yeah, for sure. In some of those speeches and those book speaking engagements, what are like a couple topics that are like mandatory that you have to speak on? Like, yo, this is going to be in my speech. This is what I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I actually start the conversation with like a quick bias exercise, and I do it with celebrities. And I ask the question like, imagine this celebrity or this musician isn't necessarily them. Imagine they come into work as a salesperson on your team. Like, would you consider this unprofessional? And I start off with Katy Perry, right, with her pink hair. And for me, with it being the first thing that we talk about, you really start to make people feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you start making them realize that, like, no, we need to unlearn just as much as white people need to unlearn. Like
For fact.
there's this idea that like only white people need bias training. I'm like, couldn't be further from the truth, because you would be surprised that by the time I get to from Katy Perry and I move into Quavo,
Mm,
people say that they wouldn't hire Quavo because of how he looks. People,
mm.
our community,
Wow.
tell me that.
Yeah.
You know
No,
what I
it's
mean?
crazy.
So how do we expect other people to accept us if we don't even accept ourselves?
Mm, that's crazy. No, I mean that's part of some of the history as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the Caribbeans, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, they will look at whiteness as a way of success, wealth, right?
Yeah.
Um, man, that's crazy. That's crazy.
But if
What
you think
else?
about it too, if
Yep,
you think about it too, which I think is powerful, is like think about the audience that are in these rooms, and like our perception doesn't just have an impact on us, has an impact on people around us, right? So
mhm,
if you imagine in the audience, it's not only employees, but these employees are also mothers, their
mhm,
fathers, their uncles, their aunts. They have other people that they are influencing with their own bias, right?
mhm,
So if somebody looks at Quavo and says like, "Oh, his dreads are unprofessional," right? They're going to teach those same things down to the next generation, and that's how the
for
cycle
sure.
continues.
Continues. Yep. Yep.
Like it can stop with us,
For sure.
yet it continues with us because we are scared to acknowledge the bias that we have. And
Mhm,
I get into like extreme examples, what some people will call extreme, because people can't even fathom it. And like, listen, I'm not encouraging people to get a face tattoo. I don't have a face tattoo. But when I ask people like, are face tattoos unprofessional? A lot of people say, yeah. But you got you got to think about the definition. It's like, again,
definition. Yep.
what about a face tattoo gives you the indication that Quavo doesn't have the skills or competence needed to be an engineer, salesperson, etc., right?
Exactly.
Nothing, but it's because of our experience. Like, listen, I grew up in the hood. Like, I understand
For sure.
what people with face tattoos are typically associated with, but that's based on my experience. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
That
No,
doesn't make it
absolutely.
right. It's just based on my experience.
No, for sure. Could you give that the statistic about the Yankees where they have this rule or this thing where you can't have facial hair? I mean, that reminds me of another situation that I went through. But talk about that. I mean, that's just crazy, just right in our face. I didn't even notice it. I didn't even realize it was a rule. But now that I heard it from you, I was like, man, if you look at all the Yankee play, go ahead and let the people know what it is exactly.
Yeah, well, it's funny too because all the Yankee players, well, some of them, they grow beards in the off season.
Mm,
So you can look up like CC Sabathia, Aaron
yeah.
Judge, a
Yeah.
bunch of them. Robinson Cano got a nice beard in the off season, but during the season, they're not allowed to have facial hair. In fact, they're also not allowed to have like what I would call traditionally black hairstyles, like the dreads,
Mhm.
braids, afros. You can't have your hair past a certain length, and it's all around this idea of what a professional looks
Professional,
like,
yeah.
right?
Wow.
It's the only team in baseball that does that. And if you think about like, oh, but they're the Yankees, they get paid millions of dollars, like it's not a big deal. Well, you got to think about who's looking at that stuff though. Like
Mhm.
kids are growing up and saying like, oh, well, if I want to be Yankee, I need to give up a part of myself to
Mm.
be that. And this is the thing about baseball players too. Like we often like are willing to sell ourselves out for money,
Mm. Yeah.
right? For the right price. It's like for the right price, how much will we have to pay you to cut your dreads off, right? And people may not think it's a big deal, but for many people, that's one way of how they express themselves.
Mhm. No,
And the
for sure.
craziest part about all of this is that there's a law in New York that prevents companies from discriminating based on hairstyle. It's called the
Mm.
Crown Act. Yet private institutions could get away with it because it's a private institution, right? And it's not just the Yankees, like financial firms still do that stuff. I went to high school, they still had that same policy. Um, but yeah, a lot of people don't know about it because we don't even second guess it.
Mm. And even with these policies into place, like who, I mean, these people are probably still going to judge if they wanted to, right? What advice would you give people out there that are trying to, that trying to get around that, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? Like, man, I feel like my appearance is going to prevent me from getting this job, even though it may be a law that it's not supposed to. But advice did you give people out there that are feeling like that?
Yeah, well, I think so many of us have been like hiding who we are for so long that
Mm-hmm.
we don't even know who we are, right?
Mm,
And I think what you need to do is really take it in steps. Like,
mm-hmm.
don't just one day, over the weekend you get a full body tattoo, you turn your hair purple, you get piercings, you do like literally everything at once. Like, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, like, even when you look at the word authenticity, it's a buzzword that we often don't define for ourselves. And what I
Mm-hmm.
found, it's the first question that I ask in every episode, and not once has someone said the same thing, which
Mm,
tells me that we all have a different definition of it,
for
right?
sure.
And it's all typically based to an insecurity that we have from our childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody may say, like, oh, well, my most authentic self is when I feel powerful enough to, like, not censor myself. And maybe that goes back to childhood trauma where, like, your mom told you not to speak unless spoken to, kind of shit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think we need to really think about, like, well, what is my authentic self? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And then start kind of like turning things on one by one. Maybe you start, I'm making this up, but like not shaving,
For
and
sure.
then seeing what that reaction is like at work.
Mm-hmm.
And then by you not doing everything at once, you can start to realize how you're being perceived by other people, and then start to work on, okay, well, now that I am maybe receiving microaggressions, and maybe now that I'm getting certain comments,
Mm-hmm.
okay, how do I respond to those comments?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like, you start building those soft skills and confidence in order to, like, speak up for yourself about one specific thing versus everything all at once. And slowly you'll start building more confidence and start unraveling other parts. Maybe the next part is like, you know what, next time someone asks me what I did over the weekend, I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually gonna tell them I was popping bottles and smoking hookah. Not that there's, not that everyone does that, but I'm just saying that for me, that was the thing that I hit.
Mm-hmm.
And but overall, on top of everything, you gotta be like really fucking good at your job. That's the
Mm-hmm.
number one thing. Because even when you get those microaggressions for like growing your beard out or talking about your weekend, and people be like, oh, you shouldn't talk about that, it's unprofessional. You could be like, do you see the numbers that I'm driving? I'm killing
Yeah,
it.
I'm
So like,
showing up.
yeah, like, what is that? What is me doing this? Insert part that you're about who you are have to do with me doing well at my job, because they can't take that away from me.
Mm. Yeah, powerful advice. I love it. I love it. Um, Man, good stuff. We can start wrapping this thing up. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you is, what is your vision for this mission and this community that you're building, right? Like, let's just say, I don't want to ask you, where do you see yourself in the next 10 years? I want to ask you, like, in the next 10 years, what type of impact do you see yourself having on the community, on the Latino community? What do you see?
Yeah. So I think so. Right now, I think we're in an interesting place for the company where we are pivoting into being an educational technology company. So right now, if you look at the website, it looks like a lifestyle brand. Even if you think about the podcast, it's a media company. What I've been doing with the podcast is really kind of like research and using it as a proof point to show
Mm,
people that, like, hey, this is a problem. Not only that, but there's a solution. So after every episode, the last question I always ask is like, well, what's one thing that continues to inspire you to be your authentic self? And going into it, the theory was like, oh, it's got to be something like tangible, right? Like, people are inspired to be themselves when they have their favorite earrings, or they have their favorite shirt on, or they some sort of clothing item. That's why I launched the merch, because I thought it was that.
mm,
But the more people are telling me, it's like, no, it's not that. It's representation. It's like
mm,
seeing other people being themselves, and or even the next generation, and inspiring them to be themselves, right? So I'm realizing that, like, oh shit, it's not clothes. So maybe I need to stop allocating time, as
mm,
much time, to that. But I'm also realizing, like, all of the things that I'm talking about, it's also educating people, right? So I need to, like, pivot into from lifestyle brand to education platform and scaling that through technology. So I think eventually we'll be an educational technology company instead of a lifestyle brand that we are today.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. Man, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we go? Anything else that you feel like is important that the audience needs to hear about? Let me know. Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say I appreciate this
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah.
The representation that you're creating and literally just highlighting all of these stories, experiences of people that look like us is dope and it's powerful, man. So I just appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, the thing I'll leave people with is like, just like if you forget anything of this conversation, like if you remember just one thing, remember the definition of professionalism.
Mm.
If you look up the definition, it's the skill or competence expected of a professional. It has nothing to do with how you look, right? So if someone ever tells you that you look unprofessional, say the definition and then ask them, what about me gives you the indication that I don't have the skills or competence? Typically what's going to happen is going to be awkward silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then their whatever they say in their explanation is typically them just showing that they're biased. You can, okay, so just remember that. You can educate them on their bias by pointing them to platforms like us, like Plural, like the podcast, and say like, you know, these are resources that you can access to unlearn some of those things. But yeah, remember that definition. It's really important.
Powerful. I love it. Man, thank you for your time and your energy. Thank you for showing up here. We really, really appreciate it. Much needed conversation. Like I said, this is not something that we've spoken about. And I love that you are doing everything in your power to continue to push these conversations and narratives. Where can people reach out to you if they want to contact you, listen to your podcast? Go ahead and plug everything. And we're going to leave links to everything in the description of this podcast so you can check out as well.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Quien Tú Eres, and it's available everywhere, including Spotify, Apple, and now all the episodes are available on YouTube as well. As far as social media, it's everything at Plural, which is PLURAWL. So looking forward to connecting with y'all.
For sure, for sure. Who created your podcast cover art? It's absolutely amazing.
Thanks. It's this artist which I could link to as well. Her name is Phanesia Fabre, but it was inspired by Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if you remember the cover art for it.
I gotta check it out again. No, actually, I gotta check it out now. I'm not gonna say I know. That's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
But it's Leonardo DiCaprio is like in the middle, and it's surrounded by like people in the background like having a party. So instead of Wolf of Wall Street, I put El Tigre de Wall Street. I was like, if I was in Wall Street, because I originally wanted to go into investment banking, right? Like my version of Wolf of Wall Street would have been the salsa band playing in the background, people dancing, like me with my beard, and you know, a very like Latino version of that. And El Tigre is just like the most Dominican thing, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely connect me with her because I'm looking to do something new with our cover art as well. And I think yours is awesome. It's beautiful.
Thank you. What's funny is like it wasn't even done for the podcast. Like it was done just to do the El Tigre de Wall Street design, which people can buy on the website, like as a canvas. I just like cut off El Tigre de Wall Street and I just made it the cover art.
You just made it your own, huh? That's what's up. That's what's up. Love it. With that being said, thank you once again for being on the podcast. Make sure you guys go ahead and check out everything that he just listed, and we'll put it in the description of this podcast. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Latin Wealth on Instagram. Please share this podcast episode with one of your friends or family members that needs to hear this. And trust me, there's a lot of people that need to hear this conversation. With that being said, we'll catch you guys next week. Peace.